Good afternoon, everyone. How's everybody doing today? Thanks for coming out on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. This lecture is sponsored by the members of 8 Church of Christ Scientists in Houston, located on Memorial Drive, just east of Gessner. I had the pleasure of meeting Jen a few years ago at a lecture just like this one, and she's an amazing person. She's an amazing friend and mentor. We've been out to Oregon, been out to her house before. You know her family and her kids. Our kids all play together, but she's a special person. I'm sure you guys are going to enjoy today. It is my pleasure to introduce to you my friend and my mentor, Ginny Luedeman.
Food and everything. This is great. Except they didn't have this all lit up. I thought I was going to have to do some rock music or something like that. So I just get to talk. Wow, what a beautiful venue. The food. It's good. I came from Oregon. I don't know what Kevin told you or didn't tell you. And it's raining there, so thank you. I'm on vacation. This is beautiful. We live on 4 acres up in Oregon, and we have 6 kids, and none have the same 2 birth parents. And we've adopted a little girl from the state of California. She'd had 14 homes when we got her at age 9. We worked with a psychiatrist for a year, and she was having some struggles adjusting to a new home. But she did so well with some of the ideas that I'm going to talk about tonight that after a year, he asked if we would look at another girl. Just meet her, he said. I'd been to Humane Societies, but I'd never just met a little girl, which is way worse than going to the Humane Society. And see if you'd be interested in her. She's 6 and she's had 13 homes. And I thought, I just couldn't say no. I had been to an adoption agency, or to the county, to look at adopting a child, my husband and I, and there were 2 books that were about 4 inches deep, 1 page per child, of children looking for homes. And in this day and age, there's so many situations that bring fear into people's lives, particularly children. But this topic became one that I really found a great deal of courage in facing when we got some of these children. Well, then we have 1 birth child, my husband and I had a birth son when I was very young. And then we raised 2 grandkids. I got a 2-year-old granddaughter. My birth son had some problems, and we raised her. She's 26. And then 6 years later, he had an affair with a gal who had some drug issues, and we got a 2-month-old abandoned grandson we adopted. He's 20 now. So you can imagine how I needed to face some of these ideas of fear in raising our kids. Well, kids who haven't been through some of these issues bring forth a bit of fear. So my life has been really about facing and overcoming challenges. And I quite frankly, because I'm from Oregon, I live in, sometimes it's rough water. But I love the view when you go upstream against some of that rough water, and when you fight some of those tough issues in life. What we can see and the rewards are fabulous. So I've given you a sheet, which is the white, I guess it's colored in your case, sheet that was given you when you walked in. These are for you to keep. These are references you might really enjoy looking deeper into, both in the Bible and in Science and Health. Science and Health is a book that I study in conjunction with the Bible. It's based on the Bible and on the works of Jesus. And so these particular citations from Science and Health supported ideas in the Bible that have helped me to work through some of the fears in our family. I was in a church this morning, 8th Church here in Houston, and I was interested in their welcome. They have this lovely little welcome. And one of the things I read, it says, as the principles of mathematics have practical application in every age, Jesus' teachings are being successfully applied today to heal disease, lack, unemployment, and discordant relationships. I thought, well, what a wonderful way to kind of go into some new ideas that I found heal powerfully, and heal all kinds of issues. But I was thinking about how do I work into this from my own experience, and I recalled a period of time when I was living in Washington State on Lake Washington. And I was just a little girl. We had moved when Daddy had a drinking problem. And by age 15, I'd moved 20 times. And so it's really great. I can say I'm from Chicago, I'm from Boston, I'm from North Carolina. I'm not from Texas, darn, I love Texas. But all these places I can say I'm from. But this one place we moved to, I remember I was about 12 years old, and I looked out at this beautiful lake, and it was all sparkly and wonderful. And I could hardly wait to get into the water. I got down to the lake. And when I looked down in this lake, it was in the 60s, early 60s. The lake looked like it was filled with shredded paper. It was green and mossy and the worst looking water. But on the surface, it was so beautiful. And because I was from the Northwest and we'd had wonderful experiences in Lake Chelan, this was a shock to me. And in recent years, I did a study about this lake. And I discovered some things that you find hard to believe in this day and age. That in the early about 1905 or so, there were 14 municipalities that gradually began to move into this area. And instead of properly treating their sewage and all, they just dumped it into the lake. And by about 1966, there were these 14 municipalities dumping about 20 million gallons a day of incorrectly treated water and sewage and whatever into Lake Washington. And they did a test. They put an 8-inch disc on the bottom of the lake and came up with a camera 2 feet before it disappeared. And they thought, well, maybe we need to do something about this. Duh. But in those days, we thought this earth was ours to do whatever we wanted with, and we didn't really have respect for it like we do today. And I remember Grandpa on Lake Chelan, once a week we would go out in a little rowboat and sink all of our cans and bottles. And that was considered responsible. If they floated, you were irresponsible. Now and Grandpa was a wonderful moral man. Never would we do that today. So these dear folks, they weren't bad. They just didn't appreciate that nature needs to be taken care of in the way that we need to take care of it today. So they stopped this over a period of a few years. They stopped and they began to treat this water and so on. And 2 years after they stopped this process, that wonderful lake began to recover, and you could see 9 feet down after 2 years. And after 25 years, you could see 25 feet down, and now it's a clean, pure lake. But the lake itself was made to be pure. It comes from rivers that come from glaciers way up north. Beautiful water, beautiful green, wonderful water, teal-colored water. And I thought, well, that's kind of how fear works. We're made to be wonderful. We're made to be pure, but things are being dumped into our consciousness all the time that make it look like we're not so great and make us afraid. And that's kind of how Lake Washington was affected by this polluted concept of who cares and we'll just dump it in there and it'll go away. It didn't just go away. Something had to be done. Based on the nature of that water source, it could be purified. The water didn't have to change. It just needed to be purified so it could be itself. It was naturally made to be pure. I thought, that's so perfect when it comes to dealing with stuff that comes into our consciousness. We're made to be pure. So my thought about this was, well, it didn't seem like we're made to be pure. I'd been dumped on and I had all this stuff come into my consciousness before I knew I was made to be pure. Beginning with, I was about 2 years old, I was introduced to a prayer by my mother who loved me deeply, but this was her theology. She'd been taught she was a sinner and we were at the mercy of a God who wasn't always very fair. And she taught me this prayer, and she wondered why I was afraid to go to sleep at night. It is, now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Well, what is that all about? That is really scary. 2 years old and you're thinking you might die before you wake. So that was my first introduction to, this is a little bit iffy, this thing here, this life, a little bit scary. And it went downhill from there. Daddy had a drinking problem, 12 years old, and stuff was taken out on me that shouldn't have happened. Questions about who I was, my identity as a female, began to make me afraid of all kinds of things, not quite knowing what to do with myself. So fear was something I kind of polluted stuff I lived with for a while. And then Dad left us in the middle of the night when I was 15, and I woke up to Mother crying on the side of the bed, wishing that she told me later she had prayed that she wouldn't make it through the night, and that her sisters could raise us 3 children. In the middle of her deepest, darkest hours, she said she just thought, I don't know if I can live through this. Dad's gone. We had very little of anything. And someone called her on the phone and said, I have something for you. And she said, I'm not in a state to talk to anybody. And what it was, she said, put it in the mailbox. It was an article by Norman Vincent Peale that said, if you've done everything you know how to do, it's time to turn it all over to God. And Mother said, I just sat there on the side of the bed and I just said, okay, God, take over. And she got a call within 5 minutes from someone who wanted her to sell license plates for 90 cents an hour. That's all she was qualified to do at that time, and she took it. Now, to me, this was the beginning for my mother of a life that got better and better. But for me, I didn't see any way out. I felt like we were impoverished, we were poor, I was defiled, there was nothing, there was no way to not be afraid. I was polluted. So I ended up on my own. Mother married or moved to tenement housing on my grandfather's apple orchard in Wenatchee, Washington. And I ended up expecting a baby at 16, trying to find Daddy everywhere I could look. Just didn't find him, didn't know where he was. And from that point, I moved to San Francisco, again inside all this fear. And while I was down there where my mother and her new husband were, I was able to get a job singing. Went into a bar, they liked me, one thing led to another. Pretty soon I had a hard rock group. And some of you were here yesterday and heard some of this. But I'm experiential, and I only have one experience, so you're going to hear a little bit again. And particularly because they advertised this, so hard rock singers, there aren't very many Christian Science lecturers who were hard rock singers. So anyway, it was good on the outside, good things were happening. I was signing autographs, we had a world tour. And my equipment manager, I had 3 managers. My equipment manager, we were in a building probably twice the size of this in San Francisco. And you know, we were making money, and I bring my album with me just because I can verify that it really happened. And he had this bright idea. This is not usually in the lecture, but I thought it'd be fun to share. He had this bright idea. He was thinking of new things, and there wasn't such a thing as a light show. You know, they'd never seen anything like that. We had these balls that had mirrors on them that rotated in the middle of the room. Well, my manager got this idea, and he got an overhead projector. And he was up on the side. They had this little place he could sit up on this little bench. And he put this overhead projector on the stage. And I was there playing with Janis Joplin. In fact, that was the night we were together. We used to drink Southern Comfort backstage together and do stuff. And all these Moby Grape, Jefferson Airplane, Grateful Dead, you know, all those folks were all my buddies. And he got this projector and he put it on the stage, and he put a square glass with oil and food coloring on it. And he put another glass on top of it, and he was blobbing it, and it was making blobs all over us on the stage. And everybody's, oh, that is so cool, that is so cool. That was the first light show. I was there. You know, the dinosaur. Now it costs like $5 billion, and it takes, you know, a year to set them up. So the evolution of ideas is just fascinating. But the thing that was to me more fascinating is that there was something going on inside that I realized had to do with healing. And this idea that there's more here didn't evolve for me until I overdosed on LSD. And during that experience, I was making money, and on the outside everything was great. But gosh, so many of us have things inside that we just don't know how to live with. And the fear is really the basis of a lot of the challenges you see in this world today. And there's all these things promising us answers. And so many things that, I remember the first time somebody said drugs will make you feel wonderful. And I wanted to feel wonderful so badly because there was so much fear inside. And I went to this group of people with my boyfriend. I was living with a guy in the group. And I hadn't divorced my first husband. And there were all these long hairs sitting around. Those were called hippies, but you can kind of get the picture. They were all doing stuff and smoking stuff and saying, oh, I'm so cool, so cool. And I'm thinking, I want to feel cool too. Who doesn't want to feel cool? Everybody does. So I smoked some of what they had, and nothing happened. You guys are kidding yourself. And I said to this head guy who was kind of in charge of everything, I said, nothing's happening. What's going on? I really like to think, so I was trying to figure it out. He said, you think way too much. You think too much. You got to stop thinking. I'm thinking, how do I stop thinking? What do you think? This is all about, I was curious. And I thought, okay, I'll just try to think of clouds and a big sky. That's like the clearest thoughts I could think. And I tried it again, and it was terrible. I felt something instantly. It was horrible. I ran out of the house. I was like in major panic, and somebody quieted me down and helped me through it. And I thought, well, darn, I didn't do it right. I better try it again. And I kept trying new things until this overdose. And but I wasn't a bad girl. I wasn't. I was just trying to feel something that would make this inside stuff, that we all have it, be quiet, so that I knew what to do with my life. And I overdosed on LSD, and during that experience, and I've got articles on this, I opened the Bible 3 times to thou shalt not commit adultery, and the third time, the words were darker, thou shalt not commit adultery, and I didn't know what adultery was. And I asked this God that I assumed I was communicating with, what's adultery? And he said, through my thoughts, through this fear, it's living with one man while you're married to another. And whoa, that's what I'm doing. Then I did something that I had never done before. I later heard a story about a man who was walking along a cliff, and when he fell, an atheist, he grabbed a hold of a branch, and he's hanging there, and he can't go up, and he can't go down. It's too rushing river and too far up. And he hangs there until his arm begins to hurt so badly that he gets humble. There's nothing like pain to make you humble. And he hangs there and he says, oh, is there a God up there? And he doesn't hear anything. And he says, oh, is there a God up here? And he says, yes, I'm up here. Oh, wonderful, will you help me? And God says, yes, let go of the branch and I'll catch you. The guy goes, is there anybody else up there? Oh boy, I was at that moment when I didn't have answers. Don't you ever get to that moment where your branches, the things you've been hanging on to, the pain, the sense of yourself as something outside of love needs to be taken care of? Well, I was in this desperate overdose. My little boy was in the room. I was all alone, hanging onto the pile rug with this Bible open, and I took this leap and let go of a branch, which was, I was afraid of God, didn't trust him, didn't like religion, didn't like establishment. I was abused. I'm on my own. These were my branches, lots of them. And I took a chance, and I let go of the branch, and I said to God, if you'll help me, I'll do anything you tell me to do. And as soon as I said that, this fabulous peace just filled my heart. And I later discovered it was something that was already native to me, like the water in Lake Washington is native to the water, that I had let go of a bunch of crud that was pouring into my thought, and I had just yielded. I yielded to the idea that there was something else besides me in that room. And I got off the floor, and I called my boyfriend's mother. Her name was Grace, and she was a student of Christian Science. And that, for me, she brought me a copy of a book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, which I've given you citations from, that made the Bible come alive. Come alive in ways that I've never imagined were possible. From that moment, I began to recognize that fear was like that branch that one hangs onto because you don't know what else to do. And fear takes the form of thoughts that are the opposite of good. One of the thoughts that I realized I was hanging on to was that we were made sinners, and Adam and Eve was the story I was taught of our created nature. And I found these passages One being God created man in his own image, and then, fear ye not. Didn't even know you could not fear. Stand still, and then for God hath not given us the spirit of fear. And then I love Jesus' promise, I'm come you might have life, but more abundantly. Boy, these ideas from science and health were turning me to the Bible, to these passages, in a way that made the possibility of clearing up the pollution not only possible, but beginning to happen. And I started to recognize a new sense of myself without fear, just tiny bits, thought by thought. That fear, and the best thing I've been able to find, is like static to music or pollution to Lake Washington, that it's not part of the lake, it's not native to it, it's an imposition of thoughts that come to us that have nothing to do with our spiritual nature. Spiritual nature being the qualities of good that you and I are made to express. And I didn't really have a sense of that until I read some of Mrs. Eddy's ideas about what good was. Jesus beheld in science the perfect man, who appeared to him what sinning mortal man appears to mortals. So there was something Jesus saw in you and me, in the people of his day, that was really good. He knew, like the people who understood water, that the nature of you and me was pure and beautiful, and that this slimy stuff, this fear, was no part of us. This to me gave me a promise that there's something we can do about fear. We can challenge it. We're not made to be polluted. We're not the poor child. We're not the one who needs to feel like we're less than loved. It was like if you were adopted by a poor family at birth, and you lived within the confines of that fearful, limited sense of life for 12 years. And then someone came to the door and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. We have this new DNA testing," which they're doing with people in prisons. New DNA testing, and we've discovered we made a terrible mistake. You're actually Bill Gates' child. Yes. You would have this whole new sense of, wow, maybe there's more to me. I had that sense. Maybe there's more to me. Maybe there's more to you than this fearful, polluted misconception that I'd been living in. So I started reading and thinking and studying and praying, and it was really hard because I didn't have much of a vocabulary. And when this lady brought me Science and Health, I got a dictionary because there's words in there like recapitulation and omnipresent. Words, that I didn't even know how to spell, let alone what they meant. So my study of these ideas was just as difficult as it would have been if you were trying to pick pollution out of Lake Washington. It was tough. So what I did, I got really, because I was desperate, because it was not a bad things were happening with my body and with my thought. And on the surface, I was sparkly. I was signing autographs and making money, but boy, that stuff underneath was beginning to not feel so good. Movie stars go through a lot of this, all these promises, and everybody tries everything, and boy, it just really does stuff to your insides. And so I needed to do something about that inside stuff. So I faced fear in my thought with the idea that there's no fear in love, and with Mrs. Eddy's ideas about what God is. God, she says, is infinite, ever-present love. What a thought. I thought he was a man in the sky like Santa Claus. And I thought he kept track of all my good and bad things and was keeping score. But she was saying God is in presence, like mind, intelligence everywhere. And that God was love and life and soul and mind and soul. I said that, and spirit and principle. All these wonderful ideas of God began to turn me in a new thought, in a new way, and start to clean up my thoughts about myself. And how could we see God? Well, when fear said it was there, we had the right to see there was something else going on, that we could let go of the fearful branches and see that we were lifted up to a new view of ourselves as in the presence of God. New concepts for me. I love new ideas. They're free. and they bring wonderful healing, wonderful results. They're like children running down the aisle, beautiful and free, and they take you places you didn't even know you were going to go. New ideas. Some of the ways that I thought about these ideas were very, very practical. To me, the concept of fear is such an invasive one, but I was doing things that I should have been fearful about. Fear is a bully, and it has two doors it enters. One is a sin door, when you're making a mistake and you need to change it. The other is an ignorance door, when you just didn't know any better and you're a victim. It was easy to get rid of the sin door, because as I got new ideas of God, I could see I probably shouldn't be stealing stuff, because God is infinite love, and I could drop that behavior. I probably shouldn't be doing drugs, because God is infinite intelligence, and all of God's qualities belong to intelligence, and I can drop that behavior. Not because I was trying to be a good girl, but because I was being myself. I was learning that I was Bill Gates' child instead of the poor little girl, or I was God's child instead of the poor mortal who was trapped in a DNA pattern. So my thoughts started changing, but I had to look honestly at everything I was doing on the outside to make the fear go away, or to feel good inside. And I find it's really helpful if you're afraid of something, or if something isn't right in your thought of your world, and you're doing something outside to make it feel better, if you look at what you're doing and identify what quality of God you want to feel. Qualities of God. Mrs. Eddy was saying in her definition of God and Jesus that man is the image of love. To me, that meant all of the qualities of love are where you're sitting right now. Tenderness is where you are. Gentleness, warmth, honesty, affection, community, a sense of belonging. All those qualities of God are spiritual. You can't see them with your eyes. If you took a hand and put it on a table and looked at it under a big, powerful microscope, you'd see molecules and protons and atoms and eventually energy, and there's nothing there, depending on the power of the microscope. There's no substance there. So I reasoned, what are we? We're not matter, and Mrs. Eddy's confirmation of this, and then lots of things in the Bible that say we're spirit, made of spirit. So I reasoned that what we really are is standing in the presence of God's qualities, letting go of branches that say we're separate from those qualities, one thought at a time. And the way that it worked for me was, if I'm standing in the presence of joy, then if the thought comes to me that I'm sad because Dad left, for instance, I use what I call 4 R's. Based on what God is and what I am, I reject the first R, the thought that tells me I'm separated from good, in whatever that form might need to be acknowledged. For instance, I thought that I was separated from intelligence because I was from an addictive DNA dad. So I thought that my behavior was already predetermined through heredity. So my addictive behavior I thought was part of me. Well, I got a new idea. I'm not the poor child adopted at birth by this poor concept. I'm actually good. I'm fresh water, if you will. Or I'm the rich child, however you want to think about it. And so what I did is I took the first R, when the thought came to me, I'm addicted, and I said no. I rejected it. No, that is not me. I'm the good, strong, wonderful, intelligent reflection of an infinite mind that's right here. And I rejected that thought and thought of the qualities of God, the reverse of that addiction, good, intelligent, strong, all those Christian qualities, claimed them. In spite of the fear that was saying, oh no, you're not good, you're scared. This is the truth. No, that is not my thought. Reverse that addictive thought and see the qualities of God that were right there. And then I replaced. This is the science part. Christian part is the qualities. Science part was right here, right now. I'm those qualities. There's only one all in all, and that's God and his ideas. And he's thinking me. I'm not thinking God. He's thinking me. I'm in his consciousness. Infinite love is thinking you and me. The very nature of us, like Lake Washington, is where we come from. Good, pure, beautiful. So I began to do those first 3 R's, and then the fourth one was rejoice. That one wasn't as easy, because I was in patterns of thinking. That's what addiction is, patterns. I remember at one point, how did this relate? Well, I moved out. First of all, I started thinking about everything I was doing on the outside, and I thought of the qualities I was looking for, and I wrote them down. And I did this 4R. When the thought came I didn't have them, I claimed them, and I began to express them. The drugs fell away. Pretty soon I felt whole, more whole than I'd ever felt. I quit stealing because I felt rich. I quit smoking because I felt like I could inhale these wonderful new thoughts. And I could hardly wait to get to my books when I was working and got home at night. And then I moved into this house, and it was furnished, and I moved out with my boyfriend. I said when I got a divorce I'd marry him, but he couldn't wait and met some other girl. And I was living in this little furnished house with my little son Robbie, and I was trying so hard to see what I'm made out of. I'm not the poor girl I thought I was. I'm not bad. I'm made of good. Just loved the ideas, loved the qualities, looked them up in the dictionary, read about them, each one at a time sometimes. Sometimes I'd stay with one quality, like honesty, for a number of days. Read about integrity and honesty and wholeness, and no, rejected, I'm dishonest, reversed, integrity, honesty, right here, right now, thank you, God. It led me to a new life, really. Within just a couple of months, I started changing. My physical stuff changed. This physical stuff is not physical, it's really thoughts. What moves you from one side of the room to the next, other side is thoughts. What moves my hand when I pick up a kitten is the thought of tenderness. What moves you when you walked through the door and hugged each other was the love that is God, or that Christ presence. So I thought, well, that Christ, Mrs. Eddy says, is all these qualities of God, and they're everywhere. So I had this little apartment, and I'm feeling like, oh, this is so great. I'm feeling so much freer and so much more alive. And there was a sofa in this apartment. It was furnished, and I was cleaning and put my hand down, and I pulled out a diamond ring. I'm like, yes, this Christian Science stuff is so good. Wow, never had a diamond ring. And I put it on, and it fit perfect. And you know, you got something like that, and it's just like, whoa, heaven really is on earth. And I wore it for a few months, and the lady who owned the apartment came to visit. Now, I've been praying. Prayer to me is yielding, is letting that pollution stuff go. You know, letting it go and know it's no part of me. Let go of those branches that say we're not good and be lifted up to see what we really are. It's kind of like you'd have to go to the bank if you were Bill Gates' child and say, this is who I am. You'd show your ID, you'd claim the money, you'd take it, and you'd spend it, and you'd bless with it. So I was doing that over and over. And this dear lady came in, and we were sitting on the side of the bed talking. And she looked down and she saw my ring. I say my ring because it had become mine. It was kind of part of me by that time. And she looked at it and she said, oh, what a beautiful ring. I had one just like it. Years ago, I lost it, and it was given to me by my deceased husband. And I really had a tough moment of battle. And I thought, the ring really feels good, you know. And I said to her, oh, I've had this ring for years. Ooh, it felt terrible. I didn't know I had a conscience until that moment. And immediately something horrible came into my thought. And I realized what made me rich wasn't the diamond on my finger, but was this wonderful sense of honesty and integrity that I'd been claiming. And when I went against that honesty and integrity, it didn't feel good anymore. And I took the ring, took it off, and I said, I'm sorry, this is your ring. I found it in the sofa. And she said, oh, thank you. And she burst into tears, and I remember she said, you're so honest. And I'm like, oh gosh, my first A ever. It just felt so good. Well, I realized that what we want, we really, really want, is to be who we are. We want to be free. We want to be non-polluted. something in each one of us. Everyone, nobody's left out, no matter how foul we seem to be. It's not us if it isn't of God. Mrs. Eddy calls that stuff animal magnetism or evil or hypnotism. It's got a lot of names, but the bottom line is it's nothing. Like static to the radio is nothing. And once I began to let go of those poor me concepts and really be lifted up, I discovered a world of love that Jesus I had found was speaking about and I'd never heard before. He says in the Bible that the kingdom of heaven is within us, it's at hand, that he's come that we might have abundance. All these promises became alive and healing started happening. Fear is just something that keeps us from seeing how fabulous we are, not as mortal matter stuff, but as individual expressions of God's qualities. Everybody here can have all the joy they want to, but the branches we have to let go of might be poor me, I'm old, somebody died I loved, I don't have enough zeros in my checkbook, whatever. Those branches keep us from seeing the fabulous nature of each of us as individual expressions of God. And once I got a taste of it, once I got just a taste of what this felt like on that LSD trip, it was what I only wanted to feel again, was this sense of love. And so the points that began to make a difference in my moments were when I chose to say no to thoughts of myself that identified me as less than God's expression. And there have been so many. My first experience with healing, when fear hit hard, parents and grandparents love their children so much. And there's so many beautiful children here tonight. And my little guy, Robbie, and I were in an apartment now, living by ourselves. I was still in the music world, but that fell away eventually because of all the drugs and things that were in that world. And he woke up one morning. He had diagnosed by a physician croup. And he had croup from the time he was an infant periodically, and he couldn't breathe right. And it would last 4 to 5 days. And they said there's nothing they could do about it, but if it was cold, you could take him outside, but it didn't cure it. And I had been learning that we can face fear. Even if it seems like everything in our senses say it has a right to be there, we can face it. It's not powerful. In fact, the reaction fear has to being faced identifies its name. It is powerless. Fear is not real. It's an absence of knowing what's really going on there. So I was home, sitting in the bed, reading the Bible lesson, which I'd begun to study, and just loving the ideas. And my little guy was laying next to me, and he woke up and he couldn't breathe right. And fear just came at me. There's nothing like the fear that parents face, or grandparents. And it just came at me. I remember it was almost like a presence trying to come into me when I heard he wasn't breathing right. And I, shaken in my boots, just, barely just beginning to understand that fear wasn't power, looked at that fear and I said, no, you're not real. It felt real, it looked real, everything about it. But I was really trying to do what the Bible said, that I don't be conformed to this world, to this lie. And I said no, and then I thought of all the qualities of God, the second R, first reject, then reverse. What qualities of God were my child's qualities? Spiritual qualities that I couldn't see with my eyes, but I knew God as love would not leave my dear little Robbie without these qualities. So I looked at those thoughts that were the opposite of fear, of croup. What would be some qualities that would be the opposite of croup? Maybe you can wake up and share with me so I can take a drink. What are some qualities that children express?
Laughter, trust, love, loyalty, joyful, innocence.
Gosh, there's so many, I can't repeat them. Lots of them. I thought of those qualities, and I really, like a chalkboard in my mind, thought of each quality. That's what Jesus did. He showed us qualities of God. Jesus, because he didn't have a birth dad, he only had a birth mother, he saw spiritual qualities where we can't see them or didn't see them at that time very clearly. And when some little child looked like he was dead, he said, no, the quality of life is there, and that child was alive. And where people were hungry, he said, no, there's abundance there, and those people were fed. And if people couldn't pay their taxes, no, there's abundance, and there was money in a fish's mouth. He constantly revealed the reality of life to be wonderful. So here I had these qualities of God that Jesus taught about children and about life. And then I did the scientific third R. I took those qualities in my mind, and I thought of my son, and I prayed right there, right where that dear little fellow is. All of those qualities are there right now, and they're the only reality of his life. God is life. And therefore, wonderful, buoyant, joyous qualities are there where Robbie is. And then, thank you, God. And I did this until there was an adjustment in my thinking, probably 3-4 minutes. It didn't take long. And something happened, and I knew this was the truth. And I looked down, and Robbie was breathing normally, and it's the last time he ever had croup. It was gone. I thought, okay, this is really good stuff. This is really good stuff. And I'm the first person in a great big family to ever think these ideas. And I started really studying these ideas, really applying them. Science and Health is filled with thoughts that have to do with healing. In the back 100 pages, I couldn't believe the healings that had happened just from reading the book. So I dove into, I had never read a book through by age 19. We didn't have time. I was defending, Dad was 6'3", and he was scary when he was drunk, and I got tough. So I defended my brother and sister who were younger, and my mom who was gentle and sweet. So I was tough. I didn't have time for school and books and stuff like that. So I started reading. I read everything I could get my hands on about Mary Baker Eddy. Oh my gosh, what a woman. A woman who loved with such courage and faced fear in a world where women couldn't even vote, and came forth with a way of thinking that says, no, we are not victims of an evil that has created us, and we're not made to suffer. We're made to live love, and that evil has no power. This woman was making declarations about life that no one had made since Christ Jesus, and the healings that were happening in her life. Well, I read this one recently within the last, probably 20 years now. And I was thinking about Texas, and sometimes when I lecture in the South and the Midwest, they have droughts. Oregon, I don't think we've had a drought. We have other things, but not droughts. And I was reading Mary Baker Eddy, Christian Healer, and you can get a copy of this book through the reading room here. And there's this one part I thought was so wonderful when it comes to not only droughts, but if we don't have enough money, or we think we don't have enough patience, or we don't have enough water, or whatever. And in this case, I was thinking of the tornadoes that hit in North Texas. And a suggestion that there's something out of God's control that could take over. Or I just recently heard of someone who just was involved in a shooting. Such terrible, out of control thinking, which is really the basis of fear, saying God isn't there. And I found this wonderful account in Mary Baker Eddy, Christian Healer. It says there had been no rain in the Concord area, where she lived, Concord, New Hampshire, throughout November. The farmer who delivered Pleasant View's milk, that was the name of the place where Mrs. Eddy's household lived when she was establishing the ideas of Christian Science, so reestablishing them. The farmer who delivered Pleasant View's milk told the cook that his well was empty and his cows were beginning to go dry. In New York, I have to explain, the cows were going dry, the milk was. You guys got it here. This is Texas. When Mrs. Eddy was told about this, she smiled and said, "Oh, if he only knew love, God fills that well." The next day, when the farmer came, he was overjoyed to tell the cook that that morning He had found his well full of water, and what was amazing to him was that there had been no rain to fill it. So, what does that say about you and your possibilities as you let go of the branch that says, I need to do this for this to happen? I need to have this before this will happen. Maybe some of those branches of cause and effect in what we consider to be the laws of mortality need to be let go of. And I found we can let go of them and things appear that are invisible. Wonderful things happen when I let go of the branch that I'm just mortal, matter stuff, and that my children or my community is separate from this incredible presence of God. And I tested that. I have tested that now for 40-something years, and it has not been found wanting. It isn't always easy, because some of those branches I've got such a hold on at times, and the world does, that boy, I didn't even know I was holding on to them. But boy, when it comes to raising kids, they'll teach you what branches you're holding on to. And when it comes to government, it'll show you what branches our country's holding on to. There's quite a few of them we need to begin to really let go of and see we're living in the presence of a power that destroys fear, all of it. One of my experiences involved our 15-year-old. Kids are having a tough time being in this generation where everything is instant. We never even heard of stress when we were kids. I mean, we were lucky to get through a day, but didn't have stress like they do today. And I all the things they have to choose from, my gosh, televisions are like 5,000 channels, and drugs, there's like 4, and tennis shoes, I took my daughter shopping, and everyone belonged to a gang, or this is your preppy, and this is if you're a this, and I had kids, black, white, or red, that was it. There was no gang, no choice. So kids they're not finding it easy. So my precious 15-year-old, our birth daughter, she was having a tough time. Hair was purple and shaved up the back, and a few things were a little bit weird. And boy, we had prayed throughout her birth and throughout her experience with these wonderful ideas. So she kind of disappeared for a few days. It was a couple weeks, actually, and I was starting to get really afraid. If we look around this generation and some of the stuff, we might be afraid for our great-grandkids or our grandkids even. And I called someone to pray with me. I often call someone outside of my own world if it's my kids or something real close, because sometimes my personal feelings are just as hard to overcome as the fear. So I called this gentleman to pray with me, and I remember the first thing he said is, "Don't be afraid, she loves you." And I'm thinking, yeah, right, he does not know my daughter. He's like anything but love coming from her. And he said, "I'll pray with you." And I hung up the phone, and I thought, oh, I need to stop this. I was holding on to the branches. She's a 15-year-old, she doesn't know what she's doing. I let go of that. No, how old are spiritual qualities? They're not old, they're not young. They're forever. They're coming from God, and they're ageless. So I kind of let go of about 10 branches between the time I hung up and what happened. In about 5-10 minutes, my phone rang. And I picked it up. And that was in the days when you had phones that were on little things that they sat on. You picked them up like this. It wasn't one of those cell phones. And I picked it up, and it was my daughter, Tracy. She said, "Mom, what are you doing calling me?" I said, "What? I didn't call you. I don't know where you are." She said, "My phone rang." I said, "No, my phone rang." She said, "Mom, my phone rang. I was standing next to this phone." By that time, she was a little shaky. She was crying a little bit. She said, "My phone rang. I was standing next to the phone, and it rang, and I answered it." I said, "Well, honey, my phone rang." And I'm thinking, this is a little like the Twilight Zone. So I said, "Well, obviously, I'm cool." So I said, "Obviously, God wants us together." Give God the credit. And she said, "Oh, Mom, I've had a terrible time, but I met this guy. Oh, gosh. And I want to bring him home." And she knew my buttons. She said, "And he wants to know about God." Right. She had him all figured out. So she said, "Can I bring him home with me?" Well, you know what I had to say. I was trapped. So I said, "Okay, bring him home. Well, I hadn't seen her for 2 weeks at least. She said it was 3 weeks, and I don't know exactly. It was a couple weeks. So I'm waiting in this picture window, waiting for Tracy. Hadn't seen her, really missed her. She's such a sweetheart when she was herself. And up drives Tracy on the back of a motorcycle with a guy who looked like he crawled out from under a rock. Oh my gosh. I thought, oh, you gotta be kidding. And he had on leathers with chains, no shirt, scraggly hair, bell bottoms, no helmet, and she's on the back. I wanted to go out the back door, but I couldn't leave my daughter, so I'm stuck. And I had learned that the value of prayer is if you can see a quality of God in another person, just one quality, all the rest of them are there. So I knew I was under the gun to see one quality of God in this man, this young man. He was probably 2 or 3 years older than she was, maybe 17, 18, I don't know. And sometimes the qualities are just one little thing. When you walk through the door, that's why I meet everybody. You don't know it, but I was looking at you for a quality of God. And that's why I ask your name, or I like to hear your name, because I can see something in each one of you. And I know if one quality of God is there, the rest of them are there. Because God isn't split. He isn't in little pieces. He's everywhere, all. Powerful stuff. And so if there's one quality of God there, and it looks like some fear is keeping you from having another quality, I can know that quality's there already. God got there first. Fear never makes the music go away. Static never touches the music. So in comes this young man and my daughter. They sit down, and boy was I challenged. I could only think he's wimpy, and wimpy is not a quality of God. It was apparent, judgment, self-righteous, really ticked, protective, everything the parent stuff has in it. And it's hard being a parent. I just really wanted to deck him rather than, especially being me as a parent. I used to gesture people, and it wasn't a wave until I learned about gentleness. And so, if they cut me off in the car, this is a new thing to think God is love and I'm His perfect child. That's a big thing. So I'm sitting there looking for a quality of God, listening to Tracy and seeing this holding hands and stuff, and I finally found one. He was gentle. He was gentle. He had a sweet gentleness, and then there was tenderness, and I claimed, okay, fear can't touch me. It's not real. Tenderness is there, so is intelligence, so is wisdom. So I just began to pray in my own thoughts about him. You can always pray for your thoughts about others, and specifically by name. I can't be made to believe that Mark is unkind. Mark is God's reflection of all of God's qualities, and I know it because he's in my thought. And I'm not going to have this guy someplace else besides in the presence of God in my thought. So I'm praying for this guy in my thought of him. He didn't ask me to pray for him, so I wasn't praying for his thoughts of him. I was praying for my thoughts of him. I think he was comfortable with his thoughts. But he hung around for like 8 months. My silver disappeared. We had insurance. And I prayed, man, this guy is honest, and I know it. I can't be made to believe he isn't. But if I'd kicked him out, she would have left too. Eventually, he would sometimes not show up, but then he'd be there in the morning on the floor. We have kind of an open door policy because that's just worked for us. We've had a lot of foster kids, and we help kids, we mentor kids in the street and stuff. So about 8 months went by, and they broke up. Yes. I was so grateful, but I never let my thought of him honor the fear that I felt. And it was so neat because years later, many years later, we got a letter from this young man. And it said, I want to thank you and your family for what you did for me. He said, at the time that I was doing all the stuff I was doing, and he apologized, I was so desperate. Nobody had ever been kind to me. Nobody had ever seen me with any respect until I met your family. And because of you, he said, I'm a Christian. I live in, I think it was Nebraska. I have 5 kids, and I'm a wheat farmer, and I've got my life together. And he was thanking me, and I was thinking, yes, it was worth the silver. It just feels so good. To me, the idea of being able to stand up against fear. And fear is that anxious feeling, that anxious thought that says love isn't there. And it comes to all of us. But standing up to it with this idea of 4 R's, or however you pray, because that's not really a formula, it's just kind of the way I do it, is so dynamic that there isn't a single thing on earth that can't be challenged, because, like Lake Washington, it was made pure. Anything that is evil, it would be absolutely in contradiction to life. It just destroys itself. Cancer destroys itself. It has no purpose. Evil destroys itself, and what would you have but nothing? So the prospect of evil being something is only to be overcome by understanding what's already there. And we can do it. We can do it because there's something within us that knows how. And I struggled from panic attacks for a number of years. Seemed to be some of it drug-related, things I'd gone through. And I stood against it. No, that is not my thought. And then I claimed the qualities that are the opposite of just raw fear for no reason. Intelligence and peace. And I read all kinds of things, and I looked up those qualities in the dictionary. I really worked with that. And it wasn't until we were in Texas, we were stationed at we did live in Texas. Fort Hood. Yeah, Colleen or Popper's Cove, I think both. Anyway, I was in Texas, and I love the Texas night sky. Oh gosh, in Oregon you have a tree there, you just get to see a little bit. But in Texas is clear across. And I had this panic hit me in the night, and it would hit me without warning. And when it would hit me, I would find that there was something here to help me always, because the natural state of things is health, is balance, is clarity. That's my gift from God as his child. So I was just, whenever this fear would hit, I would fight. I would fight with these 4 R's. And it was in the middle of the night in Colleen, and this fear hit. My 2 kids were asleep, and my husband was asleep, and I didn't want to bother him. So I was up in the bedroom, and I was praying. Fear is not real. It's not my consciousness. I can't be made to believe that I'm afraid. Right here, afraid. Right here is peace and all the qualities. And right where I am, replaced. Right here, right now. Thank you, God. And then I listen. And I know God speaks because I hear his voice. He calls me sweetheart. And so I always know it's God talking. So he said, sweetheart, go to the window, open the shade, and look up at the stars. And I could hardly wait. And we had one of these kind that roll up, so I rolled it up, looked up, and there wasn't a star visible. I thought, oh my gosh, where are they? What's God doing now? But I can trust him. He doesn't mess with us. He loves us. We're his children. We're his cherished creation in his consciousness. So I looked up and I listened, and he said to me in a sequence of ideas, are the stars there? And I thought, yeah, they're always there, and they're in perfect order. And I could envision the Big Dipper, and I could envision the North Star and some of the beautiful stars in the sky. And he said, well, all the clouds on earth, they never touch the order of the stars, do they? And I thought, no, the stars are still there. The clouds are just a mist that'll go away. And this was the neat part. He said, well, your thoughts are just like the stars in the sky. They're in perfect order now. I give you, God said to me, your thoughts. Every thought you and I need, God gives us. We have thoughts of healing. We know how to heal. We have thoughts of ascension. Jesus said we will eventually ascend. We have thoughts of abundance. Every single part of our nature, including our thoughts, are in perfect order in their true spiritual identity. And that this stuff we're letting go of is the fear, the false concepts of the earth that seem to be able to pollute consciousness but never really touch it. And I thought, okay. I thought we had little minds, that we were choosing good thoughts and saying no to bad ones, and that I was building this kind of mental place from thoughts I was choosing. What I realized is you already have all right ideas. I already have every right idea. And Mary Baker Eddy's definition of man, the compound idea of God, including all right ideas. So we're not making ourselves something when we say reject. We're saying, that's not me. That's not my thinking. And then we're reclaiming what was already our birthright as reflections of God. And then we're knowing it's been true and it's the only thing true right here. And then we're living it, we're expressing it, in doing good things, in sharing, in praying, in doing all the stuff that's in us to do. In Lake Washington, it was sparkling. So in us, it's sparkling. And I still had to work through these panic attacks. It took me a few more years, but I found the whole world was helping me. Sometimes I'd get behind a bus and it'd say, yield. I'd go, okay. Or I'd see a stop sign and say, stop. Oh, okay. Or if I was on an airplane and something would hit me, I'd just jump up and love somebody. And oh gosh, it was. And then I remember when I was going to church one day, I was turning the corner, and it was just like this fog just lifted and there was no more fear. It was just gone. I was so free. I couldn't fly before. I couldn't go over bridges. I didn't like to leave the house. I was uncomfortable in crowds. I wasn't going to do this. There were a lot of things that were outside my comfort zone. I go to sleep now before the plane takes off, oftentimes. I don't mind bridges a bit, and you guys are beautiful. So the idea that fear can be challenged isn't something that we just have to make up. You know it. You have the Holy Spirit in you. There's one point that's really vital, and that's DNA. DNA says that you and I are destined to be what we are. DNA is a toughie. It says you're established, and that's it. And I had two experiences with DNA. One of them was my first person who called me to pray with him was a young junior in high school. And she said, I have to take some tests tomorrow that will determine where I will be in college. And if I don't pass the math test, I'm not going to get into the school I need to get into. And she said, nobody in my family understands math. And she had good grades in every other subject but math. And I really wanted to do a good job of praying. And so she said, will you pray for me tonight? I said, I would be happy to. And I sat down to pray and I just listened. When I pray, I just listen first for guidance. What direction does thought need to be awakened? And it came to my thought, mind, God, is everywhere, so there's only one source of all thought processes. That our thoughts are part of what mind knows, that we don't pass back and forth DNA through genetics, but that God gives this individual all of her thought processes, and that there is no DNA, which I now dub does not apply to you and me as expressions of God's qualities. So I prayed that way and just really yielded to the idea that mind's thoughts are already hers. They're in perfect order, and she knows what she needs to know because God is all-knowing. Well, she told me the next day, she called after her test, she said, I studied normally, and I went in to take the math test, and it was in multiple sheets of questions. She said it was like some light went on, and I understood every single answer. She said I didn't overstudy, but it was like all of a sudden I knew how to answer the questions, and she got every single one right, and she went on to get top grades in math. So for our children, our grandchildren, or ourselves, it's so vital that we don't allow the thought that my parents went through this process and died at a certain age, so I'm in the same process. Or even when we think of the past, if we allow our consciousness of the past to stay in something was lost or something wasn't right, we're carrying it today. And what we carry today are branches that we want to let go of. An example, the second one, is my grandmother, bless her heart, was just so creative. And she knit these beautiful little dolls and balls and baby sweaters and mittens for me when I was a little girl. And I love Grandma. I still love my grandma. She smelled sweet. And my sweet little grandma, as she got into her 90s, her hands weren't right. And there was something on the thumbs and fingers and they didn't move right. And I just kind of thought that was part of being a grandmother. I didn't have a sense of how to reject fear. And about 2.5 years ago, Grandma was passed, and about 2.5 years ago, my thumb became very painful, and there was this thing on it that was a lump that didn't look right. And all of a sudden, I saw my grandma's hands beginning to develop in my hands. And at first I thought, oh, isn't that wonderful? I'm like Grandma. Mistake, because what I was doing was cherishing heredity. And its ugliness is not part of man as God sees him. God's love doesn't take away the joy and the beauty of our hands and our feet, but it makes them less limited as we understand it, so that we can jump higher and walk on water according to Jesus and feed people rather than become crippled. So I realized this was a trap, which I would say animal magnetism or the devil or whatever static you want to call it, was trying to impose on my thought. It was a polluted non-thought. And so I mentally thought, no, that never touched my grandmother. Her precious hands were made out of generous kindness, wonderful spiritual qualities, and I mentally rejected that thought I had of her until I felt at peace. Then I had to think about myself. Everything I have comes from you, Father, Mother, God. I'm in the presence of God's qualities right here, right now. And I rejected that thought that I was DNA, even if it was sweet DNA. I'm not from mother, I'm not from grandmother, I'm not addictive dad, I'm not sperm and egg, I'm idea. Compound idea of God. And that's why I think Jesus said, call no man father on earth, for one is your Father which is in heaven. There's a source beyond matter. And he proved it. And he proved it so beautifully. He's like my big brother. What a wonderful big brother. Showed us what our father and mother does. And I rejected this concept. It was painful for a number of months. But I just kept, no, that is not my thought. And then I thought about my hands. Hands are fabulous expressions of purpose, of beautiful joy, of giving. Oh, they're wonderful expressions of God's qualities. And I was coming back from California on a lecture tour, and I looked out at this fabulous sunset. It was really red and beautiful. And I looked down, and my thumb was normal. It didn't hurt. I had forgotten all about it. And that was the end of any symptoms of hand problems. How wonderful it is to think that wherever we go, whatever we do, God got there first. And for me, that means whether it has to do with our pets, and I have to do a pet thing just because I've got some kids, but we're supposed to be out of here at a certain time. Who's my chairman? Who's going to tell me to be quiet? You want me to be quiet now?
Well, we haven't read until 3, so.
Okay, well, I've got one more for the children, and for one man here who, I think he's here. I love dogs, and I've had Great Danes. Anybody here have a Great Dane? Yay! She said yes. If it's just in your heart, sweetie, that's okay. Mother's saying no, but you said yes. I accept your yes. Do you know what, honey? Do you know that dog and God are the same word, but they're backwards? That's because of Great Danes. I had this Great Dane named Stanley. Stanley was black and white, and he was 37 inches at the shoulders. It's big, and his head was big. And he just loved everybody. Great big dog, black and big floppy ears. And Stanley had what's called a soft mouth. I was out in the garden and this butterfly flew past. Stanley grabbed the butterfly with his mouth. And I said, Stanley, no. And he opened his mouth and the butterfly just flew on. And my kids love to tease Stanley because we have a 1/10 of a mile driveway. And they would close the umbrella, sneak down to the bottom of the driveway, and Stanley was supposed to be a guard dog, but people would come over and he was like, oh, a person, and he'd sit on their lap, and he could put his front feet on the floor with his bottom on a lap because he was so huge. Well, everybody knew he was a coward, but because we live in the country, we thought, we needed a guard dog. My husband was in the military. I ended up married to an Army chaplain, so that proves God is amazing. Anyway, and that was 2 years after being a hard rock singer, so that's another lecture. Anyway, so Stanley my kids would hide down at the bottom of the driveway, and Stanley would be up at the top, and they'd take an umbrella and they'd open it up and come sneaking up the driveway, and Stanley would go, oh, bark and jump behind a tree and jump out and bark. And he talked. He said, I said, Stanley, say I love you. And he'd go, I love you. And you could understand it. It was that clear. And I'd say, Stanley, say mama. He'd go, mama. And I was like, well, this is the most wonderful dog in the whole world. Well, somebody had escaped from the penitentiary. We're in the state capitol. And we live, as I said, far away. We didn't have a gate at the time on the front gate at the end of the driveway. And we have a house that has stairs that go upstairs, a landing to the front door, and then stairs that go downstairs. So I was downstairs doing some laundry, and I didn't know, where Stanley was. It was a summer day, and we didn't have a screen door. Everything in our house is always open. We don't ever lock anything, so we're out in the country. And I heard somebody knocking on the door, so I came up. There was a man standing there, and he didn't look quite right. He was in grubby clothes, and he had a squirt bottle in his hand, and I noticed there was no car, which wasn't a good sign. And I didn't see Stanley. I thought, where's Stanley? Usually he's right in everybody's face when they come to the door. And so the man said, he was standing there looking at me outside the door. I didn't have the door closed. He was just right in front of me. But he said, I have something for you. And I didn't have a good feeling. And I started feeling afraid. And he said, it's only going to take a minute. And I said, I'm not interested. And I started praying. Wherever you are, you can pray. No, I'm not afraid. That's the first thing to pray. I am not afraid. The second thing is qualities of God like love and power and joy, and God's hugs are right here, right now. Thank you, God. So I started praying. And the man said, I have something for you. And he stepped toward me, and I stepped back. And he said, it's only going to take a minute. I said, I'm not interested. And I'm praying. Boy, I can pray 4 hours like this. Nobody even knows I'm praying really fast, really strong. And I was starting to feel this something was coming at me that was scary. And so I was really listening to God, because I know God is more powerful than anything on earth that could hurt us. Whether you're at camp, or you're playing in the swimming pool, or you're at home with your brothers or sisters, or all alone, God is more powerful than anything that could hurt you. And the third time, the man stepped inside my door, and he said, it's only going to take a minute. And I felt that God within me. God is wonderfully close. Closer than a mom or a dad. He holds our hand, and he gives us ideas that are powerful. And I was thinking and listening to God and feeling more of God's strength. And I said, I'm not interested. And right as I felt that strength of God, slowly down the stairs came Stanley. I've never seen him act like that. One step at a time. And I looked at him, and he was so different. And he sat down next to me. His head was about this high. And the guy looked at me, and he looked at Stanley, and he said, whoa, that's a big dog you have there. And I said, yes, he is, isn't he? And the man said, well, I guess I better go. I said, probably a good idea. And he turned around and he left. And I said, thank you, Stanley. Now, if it had been a cat, he probably would have gone, and maybe done the same thing. Maybe it would have been just as good. But the thing that I love to impart is that we have everything we need within us to handle any element of fear and to heal this world. And on that note, for those of you who've come to 2 lectures, you're going to have 6 things to heal. I'm giving an assignment again, and I gave one yesterday. But if you're this eager to come again, then you've got more to do. Please choose in the next week 3 things that this world is trying to scare us about. Whether it's drugs or war, whatever it is, you choose 3 things and know the truth about them until they no longer impress you. And if you'll do this, I promise you, you will see something evidenced on earth as it is in heaven that will show you that your prayers, knowing the truth, are like what Jesus said, will make you free. And not only you, but this world will be better. Because you're part of the solution. You're here because you're receptive. And I don't care if you're 2 or 202, you are part of the solution to a world right now that needs you and needs your right, clear thinking. So this mist of mortality can be lifted. And we can see just a little bit more that the kingdom of... You can't leave. You have to stay here and do this now. Knowing that this kingdom is here and we have dominion over this earth, and we can have a life, he's a friend, without fear. Thank you.